The Federal Reserve has just made a decision that will destroy the American middle class. Not might, will. And if you understand what I'm about to show you, you'll see it's already happening. Right now, the United States is carrying nearly $38 trillion in national debt. The interest payments alone have crossed $1 trillion per year. That's more than we spend on defense and more than we spend on Medicare. And yet the Fed just cut rates again. You know what that means? They are choosing inflation over collapse. They are choosing to destroy your savings rather than allow the system to fail. People trust a currency when it's backed by something real, something tangible, something that can't simply be printed into existence. Stage 1, fiscal discipline. Then comes Stage 2, expansion and temptation. Success creates confidence. Confidence creates borrowing. Wars get funded, social programs expand, deficits become normal. The central bank steps in as the buyer of last resort. Money creation accelerates, but everything still looks fine because growth hides the decay underneath. Next is Stage 3, crisis and desperation. Debt becomes unsustainable. Interest payments consume tax revenue. The central bank faces an impossible choice: raise rates and crash the economy, or print money and destroy the currency. They always choose to print. That's exactly where we are now. Then comes Stage 4, collapse and reset. Hyperinflation or default. Currency loses credibility, savings evaporate, social order fractures, the system resets, usually through chaos, sometimes through war, but always through the destruction of middle-class wealth. You think this sounds dramatic? You think it's fear-mongering? Let's look at history. Take Rome, the greatest empire of the ancient world. At its peak, it controlled the entire Mediterranean. It had unmatched military power, engineering marvels, and a currency, the denarius, trusted from Britain to Egypt. At first, Rome's money was solid. The denarius began with about 95% pure silver. Real money, real value. Rome's economy thrived on conquest, trade, and taxation. A coin minted in Rome held the same value whether you spent it in Gaul or Alexandria. Then Stage 2 arrived. Emperors expanded the military, built monuments, and funded massive public works. The Colosseum wasn't cheap. Neither were the legions guarding thousands of miles of frontier. Costs exploded. So Rome did what governments do when spending exceeds income. They debased the currency. Nero started it, reducing silver content from 95% to 90%, then 85%. Each emperor shaved a little more. By the time of Emperor Aurelian in the 3rd century, the denarius contained less than 5% silver. The rest was bronze coated with a thin silver layer. It looked real, felt real, but wasn't real. Sound familiar? Stage 3 followed. Inflation surged. Prices doubled, tripled, and quadrupled within decades. A measure of wheat that cost 8 drachmas in the 2nd century cost over 100 by the end of the 3rd. People lost faith in money. Merchants refused coins. The government responded with price controls. It never works. When charging market prices is illegal, sellers stop selling. Trade collapses. People return to barter. Soldiers demand food instead of worthless coins. The tax base disappears. Then came Stage 4. The Western Roman Empire didn't fall only because of barbarians. The barbarians walked through a door already opened by monetary collapse. When you can't pay soldiers, you can't defend borders. When borders fail, the empire fractures. Rome broke into chaos and decline, what we call the Dark Ages. Nearly 500 years of civilizational setback, all because they printed their way out of debt. Same pattern, different century. Now look at Weimar Germany in the 1920s, and you already know how that story ends. You've seen the photos. People using worthless banknotes as wallpaper, wheelbarrows full of cash just to buy a loaf of bread, children stacking million-mark bills like toy blocks. But do you know why it really happened? Stage 1. Before World War I, Germany had a disciplined monetary system. The Reichsmark was backed by gold. The central bank enforced strict standards. Germany was an industrial powerhouse, manufacturing, engineering, exports, a strong middle class, and real economic stability. Then came Stage 2. The war shattered everything. Germany borrowed heavily to fund the conflict. War bonds were issued. Money was printed. Leaders promised that victory would pay for it all. But Germany lost. The Treaty of Versailles demanded 132 billion gold marks in reparations, an impossible sum. Germany's entire GDP was barely 12 billion marks per year. There was no way to pay it honestly. So the Weimar government did what desperate governments always do. At first, they printed slowly, then faster, then exponentially. They needed money for reparations, pensions for war widows, rebuilding infrastructure, and keeping the population from revolting. The printing presses ran day and night. Then Stage 3 arrived, fast and terrifying. In 1921, $1 bought 75 marks. By November 1923, $1 bought 4.2 trillion marks. Trillion with a T. Let that sink in. In less than 3 years, the currency lost almost all value. Prices doubled every few days, then every few hours. Workers were paid twice a day because money lost value faster than they could spend it. People ran to stores on lunch breaks to buy anything real before their morning wages became worthless. A loaf of bread cost 200 billion marks. A newspaper cost 200 billion marks. A postage stamp cost 50 billion marks. Life savings vanished overnight. Imagine working your entire life, saving carefully, building a nest egg of 100,000 marks, enough to retire, and watching it become worth less than a single loaf of bread. Pensions disappeared, insurance policies became jokes, bonds turned into toilet paper. The middle class was annihilated. The wealthy survived because they owned real assets, land, factories, foreign currency, gold. Inflation destroys cash, not assets. The wealth gap exploded. Then came Stage 4, political chaos. The population was desperate, angry, humiliated, and hungry. They searched for someone to blame and someone who promised simple answers. We all know what followed. Hitler rose to power on the back of that economic destruction. Weimar hyperinflation didn't just destroy money, it destroyed society. It shattered democracy and helped lead directly to World War II. Monetary collapse doesn't only hurt bank accounts, it tears apart the social fabric. It creates the conditions for extremism, violence, and war. Same pattern, different continent. Now let me give you an example from our lifetime. While people were watching Netflix, scrolling social media, and while mainstream media barely paid attention, Venezuela was collapsing. 20 years ago, Venezuela was the richest country in South America, not one of the richest, the richest. Stage 1. Venezuela in the 1970s and 80s had massive oil reserves and a strong middle class. Caracas was modern and thriving, shopping malls, universities, healthcare, and a stable currency. People had hope, opportunity, and a future. Then came Stage 2. Socialist policies expanded rapidly under Hugo Chavez. Price controls, nationalization of industries, exploding government spending, free housing, free healthcare, free education, subsidized food, subsidized fuel, universal basic income before it was fashionable. All of it was funded by oil revenue. And for a while it worked. Oil prices were high, money poured in, the government could afford its promises. But economies don't run on promises, they run on production. When you nationalize industries, impose price controls, punish success, and reward dependency, production collapses. Venezuelan oil production peaked at 3.5 million barrels per day in 1998. By 2020, it had fallen to about 300,000 barrels per day, a 90% collapse. Then, oil prices crashed in 2014, and the entire facade fell with them. Stage 3. The government was trapped. It had made promises it couldn't keep, social programs, debt payments, and public sector salaries. But revenue was gone. So the government did what desperate governments always do. They printed bolívares, massive amounts, exponentially. Inflation hit 1,300% in 2017, then exploded to nearly 1,000,000% in 2018. 1,000,000%. That's not a typo. Prices doubled every 18 days. Every 18 days, everything cost twice as much. Grocery stores emptied, not because the country had no food, but because price controls made it illegal to charge what food actually cost. Farmers stopped farming. Truckers stopped transporting. Store owners stopped stocking shelves. Why sell at a loss? Why work for currency that's worthless? Medicine disappeared. Hospitals ran out of basic supplies. People died from treatable conditions. Cancer patients couldn't get chemotherapy. Diabetics couldn't get insulin, not because the medicine didn't exist, but because the currency was broken and the economy had collapsed. People lost an average of 24 pounds, not from dieting, but from malnutrition and hunger, in one of the most resource-rich countries on Earth in the modern era. Then came Stage 4, mass exodus. More than 7 million people fled a nation of roughly 30 million. They crossed borders with whatever they could carry. Families were separated, careers were abandoned, lives were destroyed. A once prosperous country became a humanitarian disaster in less than a decade. And here's the part that should terrify you. Venezuela holds more proven oil reserves than Saudi Arabia. More than Saudi Arabia. More than Iraq. More than almost any country on Earth. This wasn't a resource problem. It wasn't bad luck. It wasn't a natural disaster. It was a monetary problem. A currency problem. A government spending problem. They printed their way into poverty. Don't take my word for it. Verify it yourself. Check official government reports, Federal Reserve data, and academic research. This is too important to accept blindly, including from me. Same pattern, modern era, our lifetime. 3 examples, 3 centuries, 3 continents, same stages, same outcome. Now let's talk about why the United States is following the same script. America once had Stage 1 discipline. Once. The Bretton Woods system in 1944 made the dollar the world's reserve currency. Other currencies were pegged to the dollar, and the dollar was pegged to gold at $35 per ounce. Foreign governments could exchange dollars for physical gold. That created real accountability and real limits. The Fed couldn't print endlessly because France, Germany, or Japan could show up with dollars and demand gold. That was real money, sound money, disciplined money, and it made America the most prosperous nation on Earth. The 1950s and 60s saw massive growth, rising wages, and an expanding middle class. The American dream worked because the American currency worked. But here's what rarely gets mentioned. That system ended in 1971. On August 15th, President Nixon closed the gold window. Overnight, the U.S. stopped converting dollars into gold. Why? Because America didn't have enough gold. We had printed too many dollars. We funded the Vietnam War. We funded the Great Society programs. We overspent, and France knew it. Charles de Gaulle demanded gold for dollars. Other nations followed. Nixon knew that if he didn't close the window, Fort Knox would be empty within months, so he closed it. No more gold backing. No more convertibility. The dollar became a pure fiat currency, backed by nothing but government promise, government debt, and government force. That was the end of Stage 1. We've been living in Stage 2 ever since, for more than 5 decades. Stage 2: Expansion and Temptation. After 1971, U.S. debt exploded. In that year, total federal debt was about $398 billion. Today, it's around $34.7 trillion, an increase of nearly 8,700%. And that's only federal debt. Add state debt, municipal debt, corporate debt, and household debt, and total debt rises above $100 trillion. $100 trillion of borrowed money sloshing through the economy. But the real acceleration began after 2008. The global financial crisis should have been a reset. Banks made reckless loans. They bundled bad mortgages into so-called AAA securities. They leveraged themselves 40 to 1, even 50 to 1. When housing prices stopped rising, the whole house of cards collapsed. Lehman Brothers failed. Bear Stearns collapsed. AIG was hours from bankruptcy. The entire financial system stood on the edge. That moment was a choice. Let the system fail. Let bad debt be liquidated. Let reckless banks go bankrupt. Let housing prices fall back to reality. Yes, it would have been painful, maybe a deep recession, maybe even a depression, but it would have been a clean reset. That's how capitalism is supposed to work. Failure is part of the system. But that's not what happened. Instead, the Federal Reserve intervened with unprecedented money creation. They called it quantitative easing. It sounds technical, sophisticated, like something only PhD economists understand. But it isn't complicated. It's printing money. The Fed created dollars out of thin air and used them to buy government bonds and mortgage-backed securities. QE1, $1.7 trillion. QE2, $600 billion. QE3, another $1.7 trillion. Operation Twist, hundreds of billions more. The Fed's balance sheet went from $800 billion in 2008 to $4.5 trillion by 2015. They quintupled the money supply. Quintupled it. And where did that money go? Did it raise wages? Did it help workers? Did it lift the middle class? No. It inflated asset prices. Stocks rose, bonds rose, real estate surged. If you owned assets, you got richer. If you didn't, you fell further behind. The wealth gap exploded. But the consumer inflation stayed quiet, at least at first, so the Fed kept printing, kept expanding, kept telling everyone there was no problem, no inflation, no limits, print forever. Then COVID hit. In March 2020, the economy shut down. Businesses closed. Unemployment jumped to nearly 15% overnight. Markets crashed. Panic took over. And the Fed went nuclear. They launched the largest money-printing operation in human history. $3 trillion in 3 months. $3 trillion in 90 days, more than they printed in the entire decade after 2008. They bought everything: government bonds, corporate bonds, even junk bonds. They backstopped the entire market. The Fed's balance sheet exploded from $4 trillion to $9 trillion. Then Congress poured gasoline on the fire. Stimulus checks, $1,200, then another $1,200, then $1,400. Expanded unemployment, an extra $600 per week. PPP loans for small businesses. Billions were handed out with almost no oversight. Billions were claimed fraudulently. Billions went to companies that didn't need them. Then came infrastructure bills. Build Back Better. The American Rescue Plan. Money for states. Money for cities. Money for schools. Money for everyone. Total COVID spending passed $6 trillion. $6 trillion of borrowed money pumped into an economy already drowning in debt. And here's the twist. Inflation didn't immediately spike. It took about 18 months. People thought we got away with it. They believed modern monetary theory was right. They believed we could print unlimited money with no consequences. They were wrong. Why the delay? It came down to velocity. The newly created money didn't flow into everyday goods right away. First, it parked itself in bank reserves and asset markets. Stocks exploded upward. The S&P hit all-time highs while millions were still unemployed. Real estate went vertical too. Housing prices jumped 20, 30, even 40% in a single year. Bitcoin ran from 5,000 to 60,000. During the pandemic alone, billionaires added about $3.9 trillion to their wealth. $3.9 trillion, while hundreds of thousands of small businesses were wiped out. But eventually, inflation reached the real economy. By mid-2022, CPI inflation peaked at 9.1%, the highest level in 40 years. Gas prices doubled. Grocery bills climbed 30, 40, even 50% in a single year. Rent skyrocketed. Everything became more expensive. Your paycheck bought less. Your savings lost value. Every month, the dollars you worked for were worth a little less. So what did the Fed do? After 2 years of saying inflation was transitory, Jerome Powell finally changed his tone. Inflation wasn't temporary. It was persistent. It was dangerous, and it required action. The Fed responded with the most aggressive rate hikes in modern history, from near 0% to about 5.3% in under 18 months, the fastest tightening cycle since Paul Volcker in the 1980s. But that created a new problem. The debt became unsustainable. This is stage 3, crisis and desperation. Today, the U.S. government pays over $1 trillion per year just in interest on its debt. $1 trillion. Around 13% of the entire federal budget goes to nothing productive. Not schools, not roads, not defense, just the cost of borrowing. And that's with rates near 5%. Here's the part that should scare you. If rates rise to 7%, still below the historical average, interest payments would exceed $2 trillion per year. $2 trillion. More than Social Security, more than Medicare, more than defense, just interest. Meanwhile, the debt keeps growing. We aren't paying it down. We're adding about $2 trillion in new debt every year. The 2023 deficit was $1.7 trillion. The 2024 deficit is projected near $2 trillion. Year after year, more borrowing. The government can't simply stop spending because the entire economy now runs on deficits. Social Security is funded with borrowed money. Medicare runs on borrowed money. Defense contracts use borrowed money. Federal salaries, infrastructure, everything borrowed. Cut spending hard and the economy crashes. Jobs vanish. Retirees miss checks. Chaos follows. So the Fed faced an impossible choice. Keep rates high and let the government drown in interest payments. Let banks collapse under underwater bond portfolios, just like in 2023 when Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, and First Republic failed. They held long-term bonds bought at 0 rates. When rates hit 5%, those bonds lost 30, 40, even 50% of their value. Keep rates high and let housing crash. At 7% mortgages, homes become unaffordable, prices fall, and the wealth effect reverses. People feel poorer, spend less, and recession follows. Keep rates high and let stocks crash. Higher rates mean lower valuations. The S&P already fell about 25% in 2022. Push it further and retirement accounts collapse. And with 70% of Americans invested, crashing the market crashes confidence, and confidence drives the economy. Or, cut rates. Restart the money printer. Choose inflation over collapse. slowly weaken the currency instead of letting the system fail instantly. They chose option 2. They always do. In September 2024, the Fed cut rates by 50 basis points, the first cut in years. November, another cut. December, another. They're back in easing mode, back to printing, back to choosing inflation over honesty. But this time, something is different. The world is watching, and the world is reacting. Foreign central banks are paying attention. China has been dumping U.S. treasuries for 2 straight years, selling more than $120 billion worth. Japan, the largest foreign holder of American debt, is tightening its own monetary policy. They can't keep buying our bonds forever. The Bank of Japan is raising interest rates for the first time in decades. Saudi Arabia, which has recycled petrodollars into U.S. treasuries since the 1970s, is now diversifying. They're accepting yuan for oil, Chinese currency. That would have been unthinkable just 5 years ago. The petrodollar system, the backbone of dollar dominance, is cracking in real time. BRICS nations are building alternative payment systems. They're settling trade in local currencies. They're cutting dollar reserves, and they're buying gold at record levels. Central banks bought about 1,000 metric tons of gold in 2022 and another 1,000 tons in 2023. Why? Because they see what's coming. The privilege of being the world's reserve currency is slowly eroding. And when that privilege disappears, when foreign nations stop buying our debt and stop accepting dollars for real goods, the Fed will be left with only one buyer of U.S. treasuries: itself. That is monetizing the debt. That is the path to hyperinflation. That is how a currency enters terminal decline. We aren't in stage 3 by accident. We're here by design. Every policy choice, every rate cut, every trillion-dollar spending bill pushes us closer to the same ending. The math is brutal. The debt can't be repaid. The interest can't be sustained. The currency can't hold its value forever. Something has to break. And what breaks is your savings, your paycheck, and your future. Stage 4 is what comes next, and it isn't pretty. At this point, there are only 2 outcomes: hyperinflation or default. That's it. Hyperinflation means the Fed keeps printing, keeps monetizing debt, and keeps cutting rates even as prices rise again. They'll rename it, they'll justify it, they'll blame supply chains, Russia, China, corporations, anything except the real cause. But the result is the same. Prices spiral. 10% inflation becomes 20. 20 becomes 50. 50 becomes 100. The dollar loses purchasing power exponentially. Your salary, your savings, your retirement, all of it gets destroyed, not by confiscation, but by devaluation. You still have the same number of dollars, they just don't buy anything anymore. Milk at $5 becomes $50, then $500, then $5,000. It sounds crazy until you remember it already happened in Germany, Venezuela, Zimbabwe, Argentina, and dozens of other countries throughout history. Default is the other path. Default means the government admits it can't pay. It declares bankruptcy. Bond markets collapse instantly. Interest rates jump to 20, 30, even 40% overnight. Credit freezes. Nobody lends, nobody borrows. The entire financial system locks up. Banks fail in waves, not 1 or 2, but hundreds, maybe thousands. The FDIC can't cover it. They insure about $9 trillion in deposits with barely $100 billion in reserves, about 1%. If the system breaks, deposits vanish. Social Security checks stop. Medicare stops. Government services stop. Federal workers don't get paid. Soldiers don't get paid. Police don't get paid. When money stops, everything stops. So which path will they choose? History already answered. Governments always choose hyperinflation over default, every time. Default is instant political suicide. You admit failure, you admit incompetence, you face consequences, impeachment, prosecutions, riots. Hyperinflation lets leaders pretend it isn't their fault. They blame corporations for prices. They blame foreign enemies. They blame speculators. Anything except themselves.
You can impose price controls and pretend you're fixing the problem. You can keep printing and push the reckoning off for months, maybe even years. But here's what most people miss. Both paths destroy the middle class, and both concentrate wealth at the top. In hyperinflation, asset holders win. People who own real estate, stocks, gold, and commodities watch their wealth rise in nominal terms. But people living on cash savings get wiped out. In a default, cash briefly becomes valuable before the system resets. Different path, same outcome. The middle class gets crushed. Both scenarios create social instability. Hungry people riot. Desperate people turn toward extremism. Angry people hunt for scapegoats. We've seen it in Germany, we've seen it in Venezuela, and we're starting to see early signs in America. Political polarization, rage, division, and collapsing trust in institutions. Do you really think America is immune? That it can't happen here? Ask the Romans. They believed their empire would last forever. It didn't. Ask Weimar Germany. They thought they were too advanced, too civilized for hyperinflation. They weren't. Ask Venezuela. 20 years ago, they thought they were too rich, too modern to collapse. They were wrong. I know what you're thinking. I can hear the objections forming already. This time is different. That's what everyone says, every single time. It's never different. The details change, technology changes, the names change, but the pattern stays the same. It always does. Yes, the dollar is the reserve currency. The world still needs dollars, for now. But that status isn't permanent. It isn't guaranteed. It's a privilege granted by the rest of the world, and that privilege is fading in real time. In 2000, the dollar made up about 70% of global reserves. Today, it's below 60% and still falling, a little less every year. BRICS nations are building alternatives. New settlement systems are forming.
The privilege is temporary, and it's ending. When that privilege disappears, the consequences are brutal. For decades, we've imported real goods and exported dollars. We've lived beyond our means because the world accepted our currency. When they stop, we can't import oil, electronics, or even food. Shortages follow immediately. America is powerful, innovative, productive. So was Venezuela with oil. So was Rome with military dominance. So was Weimar Germany with industrial strength. Power doesn't protect you from monetary collapse. It makes the crash worse because there's farther to fall. And innovation won't help if your currency is worthless. You can't eat innovation. You can't heat your home with productivity charts. People say technology will save us. AI will boost growth. We'll grow our way out of debt. But technology doesn't change human behavior. It doesn't change government incentives. And it doesn't change the math of unsustainable debt. AI won't pay off $34 trillion. Quantum computing won't erase deficits. Blockchain won't stop the Fed from printing. Technology is just a tool. It can raise productivity and create industries, but it can't fix structural rot. It can't fix corruption, and it can't fix the impossible logic of exponential debt growth. The Roman Empire had better technology than the tribes that overran it. It didn't save them. They won't let it collapse. The Fed has tools. The government will intervene. Who's they? The same people who said inflation was transitory. The same people who said subprime mortgages were contained. The same people who said the banking system was safe in 2007. The same people who printed $9 trillion and promised it wouldn't cause inflation. They don't control this anymore. The debt controls it. The math controls it. Reality controls it. There is no magic lever, no secret switch, just arithmetic. And the arithmetic says this path is unsustainable. Every excuse is just denial, wrapped in wishful thinking.
It's a psychological defense mechanism. It stops people from seeing what's obvious, because seeing it is frightening. Accepting it means your worldview shifts. It means some of your assumptions were wrong. It means your plans must change, and change requires effort, discipline, and hard choices. So instead, people choose denial. They choose to trust experts. They choose to believe the system. They choose to hope. But hope is not a strategy. So what should you actually do? How do you prepare for something this big? First, understand the game. This isn't about predicting the exact date of collapse. Nobody can. It might happen in 2 years. It might take 10. But the direction is clear, and the destination is inevitable. You position yourself for the trend, not the calendar. Stage 3 is about currency devaluation. That's the main risk right now. Your money will buy less tomorrow than it does today. That process has already started, and it's accelerating. Second, protect your wealth. Don't keep everything in pure dollar-denominated assets. That doesn't mean abandoning the dollar entirely. You still need cash for daily life, transactions, and emergencies. But don't store all your value in one weakening currency. Diversify into hard assets, real estate in strategic areas, not luxury towers or overheated markets. Productive land, rental property with real demand, property with utility. It's not perfect. Taxes exist, maintenance costs are real, but physical property can't be printed into existence. Commodities matter too. Gold, silver, industrial metals, energy. These are real things with real demand. When currency loses value, tangible assets tend to hold it. Gold has served as money for over 5,000 years. Every fiat currency in history has eventually failed. Gold hasn't, and that isn't an accident. Own equity in productive businesses, companies that provide real goods and services, firms with pricing power, businesses that can raise prices as inflation rises. Not speculation, not meme stocks, real operations with real cash flow. Also consider foreign exposure. Don't keep all your wealth trapped inside one system that's weakening. Swiss francs, Norwegian krone, Singapore dollars, currencies backed by more disciplined fiscal policy. Nothing is perfect, but diversification reduces concentration risk. Third, build skills and flexibility. In unstable times, adaptability is survival. The ability to earn in different ways, the ability to work remotely, the ability to relocate if needed. Skills are inflation resistant. Nobody can devalue what you know. Learn practical abilities, not just professional ones. Fixing, growing, repairing, building. When systems strain, practical competence becomes more valuable than credentials. Fourth, build community. When institutions weaken, people survive through cooperation, trust, and relationships. The lone wolf idea is a myth. Humans endure in groups. Invest in relationships now. Family, friends, neighbors, local communities. You can't store everything. You can't plan for every scenario. But strong networks multiply what you're capable of. Fifth, stay informed. Don't blindly accept mainstream narratives. They're designed to keep you calm, spending, and invested in systems that quietly extract your value. They'll say everything is fine until the moment it isn't. Seek independent thinking. Follow people who saw 2008 coming, who understood post-COVID inflation, who study patterns, not press releases. Knowledge is leverage. Understanding is survival. And sixth, act now, not later. Stage 4 doesn't arrive with a press conference. It doesn't wait for permission. It accelerates, it compounds, it moves fast. Venezuela went from prosperous to broken in less than 5 years. Collapse never feels slow once it starts.
Weimar went from stability to hyperinflation in barely 2 years, and once stage 4 begins, everything accelerates. Each day, conditions worsen faster. Each week, your options shrink. Each month, more wealth disappears. The window to prepare is closing. It's still open for now, but it won't remain open forever. Act while you can, while assets can still be moved, while choices still exist, while time is still on your side. The Federal Reserve didn't trigger the next Great Depression by accident, but by necessity. They're trapped inside a system they created themselves, trapped by decades of poor decisions, impossible promises, and unavoidable math. They already made their choice. They chose to print. They chose inflation. They chose to weaken the currency instead of facing reality. Now it's your turn to choose. You can deny it. You can hope it fades away. You can trust the same people who've been wrong again and again. You can do nothing and pray for the best. Or you can prepare. You can act. You can protect yourself and your family. The pattern is obvious. History is unforgiving.
The ending is inevitable. Don't be the person who saw it coming and stayed frozen. Don't be the one who recognized the pattern but failed to move. Don't be the one who chose comfort over readiness. Because when stage 4 arrives, when hyperinflation bites or default hits, when the system finally cracks, there are no second chances, no rewinds, no do-overs. There is only before and after is too late. The clock is already ticking.